Good evening and welcome to this News Center Maine Voice of the Voter Candidate Debate. I'm Rob Caldwell with Phil Hirschkorn, the anchor of Political Brew, and we are coming to you tonight from Aura in Portland.
Tonight you're going to hear from all 5 Democratic candidates for governor who are on the June 9th primary ballot. Early voting is also already underway. The candidates on stage from left to right, alphabetically, because that's easier for us: Shenna Bellows, Troy Jackson, Angus King III, Hannah Pingree, and Nirav Shah.
Phil and I will ask questions this evening with a focus on solutions to some of the challenges that Maine's next governor is going to face. The Maine State Chamber of Commerce is our partner in this debate and invited guests who are in the audience. We appreciate the Chamber's support, and its new report, Maine Economic Vision 2035, helped us frame some of the questions that we'll be posing this evening. Let's get started. We'll begin with opening statements, 1 minute from each of the candidates, and we will begin with, on the left, Shenna Bellows.
Good evening and thank you. When I was 4 years old, my sister was 3, my brother was 2. My parents bought a piece of land in Hancock. My father was a carpenter. My mother worked nights in a light bulb filament factory. They pitched a tent and in their spare time dug out an old cellar hole, and that's where we lived that winter. We didn't have electricity or indoor plumbing until I was in the 5th grade. I worked my way through school, served in Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, and as head of the ACLU, took on tough fights like marriage equality and abortion. Now, as your Secretary of State, I'm fighting for democracy. When Trump's DOJ came after your voter data, I said, hell no, go jump in the Gulf of Maine. And now I'm leading a coalition to fight back and protect our elections. Together, we'll stand up to Trump, protect democracy, and deliver on affordability for every Mainer.
Troy Jackson.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Troy Jackson, a 5th-generation logger from Allagash. And I've watched power and influence hold this state back, hold people back. And I spent the last 20 years in the legislature, the last 6 as Senate President. But that power, it never leaves. And that's why, honestly, I'm even more frustrated today than I was when I first started in the legislature. That is why Bernie Sanders has endorsed my campaign. He knows I'm the progressive fighter that's willing to stand up to that power and influence. He also knows that I can win in November. When I left the legislature, when I was in the legislature, I was in a seat that Donald Trump had won 3 times. I won it also. When I left, a seat that I'd been winning by 5 points, we lost by 30 points. That shows that I'm someone that can win in the areas that are tougher in the state. And I think we need a candidate that's going to fight for our values, stand up to that power and influence, and win in November, and I'm that candidate.
Angus King III.
I am so proud to be named Angus King. He's a heck of a mentor. But if you take away the name, you'd know me as the guy who worked at the White House, built affordable housing, turned cow manure into clean energy, and brought people together who had every reason to disagree to build things nobody thought was possible. We're going to need a lot more of that to bring down costs and create good jobs, and that's why I'm running for governor. But I'm also running because I'm convinced we can do better. Our system has let us down, our politics have failed to meet the moment, and people are rightfully angry. They've also, worse than that, lost faith that we can ever do anything good again and that Trump and division will rule the day. But that's not me. And as I see the strength and can-do community spirit across our state, I know that's not us either. So we have a decision to make. Do we want more of the same old politics, or do we want someone who's not from Augusta but is here to help, who can bridge the divide between policy and the private sector, between politics and real people, who can make a difference in the real world? That's what I've done, and that's what I'll deliver for the people of Maine. Thanks.
Hannah Pingree.
Well, thank you, Rob. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Again, my name is Hannah Pingree. I am the mom of 2 great teenage kids. I was born in Belfast. I'm a lifelong Mainer. I've spent most of my life living in a community of just 400 people, where everyone cares deeply about their neighbors. From chairing my local school board to serving as Speaker of the House, I've spent my entire career fighting for Maine people and working to deliver solutions. Right now, Mainers understand that we are at a pivotal moment for our state and for our country. Governors are literally on the front lines of protecting our democracy, our voting rights, reproductive rights, LGBT rights, the rights of immigrants, our ability to keep taking action on climate, and keep our rural healthcare system afloat. I have spent my entire career fighting for Maine people, and they are struggling right now with rising costs. The cost of healthcare, housing, energy, property taxes. Mainers need a governor who will lower costs. I spent my entire career fighting for the people of Maine, and I'm ready to do that as your next governor.
Nirav Shah.
Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nirav Shah. My father was a mango farmer who came to this country in 1970. He worked as a busboy while my mom babysat kids in their building. Now, as for me, I'm a medical school graduate by education, an attorney by profession, and a public health guy by passion. We all got to know each other during a very tough and dark period in our state's history. And now we're facing a whole new set of challenges. An economy where the average family can't afford the average home. An economy where healthcare is inaccessible. An economy where kids are going hungry. All while job growth in Maine is projected to be flat for the next 5 years. What we need is a bold approach that will grow our state. Add to this the challenge and incompetence of the Trump administration, and the best resistance will be results. As governor, what I will do is make Maine the blueprint, not just for our state, but for the entire country, to show what we can do here for people. Thank you.
Thank all of you. Appreciate that. A quick word on the format for this evening. Phil and I will ask questions. We'll give the candidates 60 seconds to answer a little less, sometimes when they can answer more succinctly. Everyone can see the 60-second clock so they know how much time they have. We will ask follow-up questions when necessary, and we'll try to keep things moving along at a clip that is fair, informative, and we hope lively. So let's turn now to what the candidates have to say, and Phil is going to ask the first question.
So no surprise, we're going to focus a lot this evening on the economy and affordability. We're going to start by talking about state spending and state taxes. The biennial state budget has grown from roughly $7 to $12 billion during the Mills years. Some of that's adjusting for inflation. A lot of that is spending choices. We all know you have ambitious platforms with some new programs, but first, before we get to those, as governor, are there any existing programs that you would cut? Would you even consider self-imposing a cap on state spending at its current level? Let's start with you, Shenna Bellows.
Thank you. As Secretary of State and someone who's served in the state Senate representing a district that voted for Trump and voted for me, and as a CEO of multiple nonprofits and a business owner, I have a lot of experience with budgets. And this is an extraordinarily important question because we are moving into even tougher economic times. And I do think that there is waste in our state budget that we can cut. And I will share with you, as head of the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, I ran on a platform of modernization. I brought appointments to the BMV. I've modernized our systems for businesses, and just a couple of weeks ago rolled out a mobile BMV unit, a branch in a truck that could go to rural communities like Belfast and Dover-Foxcroft, or veterans' homes and senior living facilities. And we've done a lot of that modernization by cutting red tape and finding savings within the BMV, millions of dollars a year. And so I'll just give you one example. I think the state is wasting millions of dollars on out-of-state contracts. For example, non-emergency transportation. We're paying millions out of state, not getting what we're paying for, and it's leaving seniors and people with disabilities stranded. So that's one small area where I think we could find savings. I know there are more because I found them as secretary.
And we appreciate the specificity in this answer. Troy Jackson, anything you would cut or cap with state spending?
Well, I think, it's kind of a bit of a red herring to say that, the budget has blown up under the Mills administration. I mean, obviously, Governor LePage held back on revenue sharing. That actually did blow people's property taxes up. We got to 55% on education, which voters mandated not once but twice. But sure, I mean, there's always something that could be done better. But unless you're the governor, you don't have the inside track onto what those agencies are doing. I mean, it is not as transparent as you would think, being in the legislature, getting that information. And that's why running for governor to find some of those inconsistencies. I mean, I definitely think that state government could run better if you're a working class person on a Friday afternoon, if you're trying to get something done, it's really a challenge. I mean, I think that we could be doing a lot more to streamline these things and making it easier for people across the state. But I mean, standing here today saying that there's something that's wasteful or something like that, I can't say that. I would like to see more contracts in state, and that actually might cost more money, but I think it's important to have the people in Maine get those contracts.
Angus?
Yeah, look, I'm very concerned about what the state's budget's going to look like, not just because of the growth that we've seen recently, but also because of the federal cuts that are likely coming. If you know anything about the administration, you know they're going to continue to try and hurt Maine before they're going to help us. I have spent my entire career generating tax dollars, creating jobs for people who get wages who then pay taxes. And so I am keenly aware of how hard that is and how really important it is that we focus on a careful stewarding of those dollars. I think there are certainly opportunities. There's a lot of red tape in our government right now. There's a lot of additional burden that we place on businesses and nonprofits in order to have them operate. I think we can be a lot more responsive and out of the way when government isn't being helpful. So I think, and the last thing I think is we can rely on a lot more public-private partnerships. Every solution is not a government program. The private sector can do really good work, and I think it's really important that we focus on supporting that too.
Hannah Pingree?
The next governor is going to have a tremendous challenge. The first thing that you need to do in January is to present a balanced budget. That is required by law. The vast majority of state spending goes to health care and education, things that Maine people desperately need. At the same time, Donald Trump is cutting back on health care. We know he's making Medicaid and Medicare cuts. He's also cutting food programs for kids. So it is not going to be an easy budget to balance. But are there ways in which we can save money? Of course. The next governor does need to run government as efficiently and effectively as possible. And I have worked in state government, and I've seen from the inside that there are ways that we could do things better. Right now, we actually do hire a lot of out-of-state consultants. We hire big contracts instead of having state employees do the work. I've seen it happen at DOT, where we could hire, if we paid a good wage to engineers, we could have more of those people in-house rather than contracting them from out of state. But I will say we do need to keep growing our economy. We have businesses waiting for expansion projects. We know by growing our economy, we will generate more tax revenue. So we need to do both things, and that's the job of the next governor.
Dr. Shaw?
Having run 2 state health departments, as well as being the #2 at the US CDC, a large part of my job was crafting budgets, which are equal parts values as well as accounting projects to figure out where the money goes. And as I think about the state of Maine's budget, I agree with my colleagues, the budgetary situation is going to be a challenge. Phil, to your question, there's not a program right now that I would envision cutting. As others have mentioned, we still have hungry kids and healthcare challenges that are coming our way. What I'm more focused on is using the funding that we have far more efficiently. There are absolutely opportunities in the way that we buy services, the so-called procurement process, to actually save a lot of money. Also, Democrats and state governments have been enamored of bureaucracy. To the extent that Republicans right now are focused on autocracy, Democrats have been too focused on bureaucracy. And so we have an opportunity to streamline state government, use the dollars that we have, and just be far more efficient with it. That's what I've done in my career as a manager, and that's what I'll do as governor.
Let's talk about taxes, which of course are what pay for everything state government does. The state has now on the books a recently adopted so-called millionaire's tax, a 2% surcharge on incomes over $1 million a year. That's on the books. Are there any other changes that you would propose to the income tax if you were governor? Would you raise it, keep it where it is, lower it? Troy Jackson.
I've been pretty honest all along since 2011. I was one of 5 Senate Democrats that didn't vote for the wage income tax cuts back then. I don't think that they were good for the state. I think it's where we started actually having trouble. Like I said, property taxes started blowing up. We started losing EMS services and things like that because of those cuts, education things. So I would go back and restore those income tax cuts. And I would double the millionaire's tax from what the legislature already has done. I think 4% is a much fairer way. I think that we have all kinds of issues across the state. We've all been talking about them. I hear my Republican candidates talking about them. None of those things goes away unless you have resources. And we're not going to cut $4 billion in income taxes out of the state budget. I mean, that's a joke. We need resources to make investments in this state. That's in workers and in businesses. And the only way we're going to do that is by restoring those income tax cuts that shouldn't have happened 15 years ago and doubling the millionaire's tax.
Angus King III.
Yeah, thank you. I am all for tax fairness, and the millionaire's tax, one of the things I had an issue with was that it did not go to direct middle-class tax relief. And I think that was a mistake in the way that it was structured. I think it's really important that the wealthiest pay their fair share. At the federal level, there's an opportunity for them to do something called buy, borrow, and die, which allows them to avoid almost all taxes, which is reprehensible as citizens, never mind a policy failure. So I think there are important things we can do, again, to make sure the wealthiest pay their fair share, but then that we can make sure that there is middle-class tax relief. The same goes for property taxes. We have a huge property tax burden in our state. It's killing seniors, it's killing homeowners, and that we've got to work hard to try and make sure that we can bring those down. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. And then the last thing, of course, is how do we grow our economy? As you pointed out in the question, the economy is what delivers taxes. Every tax comes from a wage, comes from a person taking a risk, hiring a person, building a job, creating a company, and creating value, and that's what we can do to grow our way out of this.
Hannah Pingree.
Certainly, as I traveled the state of Maine, Mainers are really struggling with affordability across the board. I actually hear the most about the property tax. As it relates to what the legislature did, I strongly support the new millionaire's tax on income above $1 million. I think it was the right direction. But I think it's going to be up to the next governor to balance the budget. I've worked on over 20 state budgets. I'm not going to propose a new tax if we don't need it, but we may need to figure out how do we come up with more revenue for the state, for people in Maine, especially for property tax relief, especially for programs like housing, where we need to invest more just for our communities to be successful. I think one of the things we need to do in the state of Maine is think about where could our revenue come from and how do we reduce the burden on middle and low income people. What does Maine have? We have a lot of people who come here in the summertime. I think about how we tax tourists, how we tax expensive second homes owned by non-Maine residents. I think we need to increase how we generate revenue from those sources so that we can give middle and low income people in Maine a break.
Nirav Shah.
When it comes to taxes, one of my principles is that those who can pay more should pay more. Another principle is that corporations should pay their full freight for the privilege of doing business in Maine without the benefit of any loopholes. So toward that end, I supported the millionaire's tax. I would have more supported, however, a version of it that directly took the funding and used it and applied it toward education. That would have been a better way, one, to improve our schools, and number two, to reduce property taxes at the lower level. There are other opportunities for revenue that I've started thinking about, whether that's by treating a lot of the online betting marketplace sites like Polymarket and Kalshi, treating them like gambling sites and thus taxing them like gambling, or in addition to that, normalizing the way that we tax cannabis to make it more in line with other states. So there are other opportunities for revenue out there. More broadly, the way that we will actually move forward is through growth. Growth is going to be the engine that pulls the social service train that all of us want to get to.
Shenna Bellows.
We need tax fairness, and until the legislature's recent actions, it was simply unfair that carpenters like my dad was and nurses like my mom were paying the same tax rate as millionaires and billionaires. And so I do support a millionaire's tax. I think it should be 4%. I also, as I travel the state, I'm hearing that property taxes are killing people. Seniors are worried they're not going to be able to stay in their homes. That's why I've called for a moratorium on property taxes increases for Maine residents. And I think we need to double the property taxes on out-of-staters who are gobbling up our property, because 1 in 6 Maine homes is a vacation home. And that would bring in much needed revenue for investment in healthcare, in housing, and education. And also, we do need to repeal those LePage-era tax cuts. At the end of the day, budgets are moral documents, and we need tax fairness to reflect our values and make those key investments.
Let's go back to property taxes, or expand on property taxes. The state has real limits on what it can do to affect property taxes because it's towns and cities that set property taxes. The state does have the homestead exemption, which allows people to deduct $25,000 from the appraised value of their home. Would you raise the homestead exemption, Angus King, and what else, if you're governor, could you do to affect property taxes in a realistic way?
Yeah. Yes, I would raise the homestead exemption. That's, I think, a good idea.
How much? I'll ask that of all of you.
I think you could probably double it, and that would be a reasonable place to start. I think the important thing on property taxes is two things. One is I think about regionalization. Here in Portland, the Greater Portland Council of Governments is doing great work with 30 other towns in this area, 30 plus, to make a difference on how do we pay for services. Right now we have almost 300 school administrative units, and we don't have to have that many people making individual pencil orders. So I think there's real opportunity for regionalization, for coordination, for reducing the costs that town have to bear in every town across our state. There's no reason for it, and I think there's real opportunity without towns having to give up their identity or their schools. So I think that's a real opportunity. And the next is, how do we think about those towns as the way we think about families? What are we doing to help them reduce the cost of healthcare? What are we doing to them to reduce the cost of energy? And all of those other pieces, again, that I'm sure we'll talk about, is going to make a difference for a town the same way it makes a difference for a family.
So I do think we should at least double the homestead exemption. I also think the legislature just built on the property tax fairness credit. I think we need to continue to build on that so that people who are most at risk of losing their homes have an opportunity to stay there. But I think that we need to go much, much further. And I did just talk about our ability to tax second homes owned by non-Maine residents. It would require us to open up our state constitution. But as I travel the state of Maine, I talk to Republicans and Democrats and independents who are frustrated. We have seen home prices double since 2020. That has driven property taxes, especially for residents, to a much higher rate. We need to think about how do we allow our state and our communities to assess in a different way so that they can balance the burden for Maine people. Again, asking those who have the fanciest homes to pay more, especially I live on an island on the coast. People are really struggling, and they are struggling to keep their schools open, and they're struggling to provide property tax relief. I completely agree we need to be a partner to communities and regional governments to find a way to help them regionalize, help them save money. I talk to people all over the state of Maine where certain cities like Portland and Bangor and Lewiston are struggling under the homelessness epidemic. They want to partner in the state of Maine to help provide relief, but also to get the job done, and I'm ready to do that.
You're up, Shaw.
I have publicly called for increasing the homestead tax exemption, at least doubling it, but I think we can even pencil out a scenario in which quadrupling it to $100,000 still works. That shifts more of the burden onto even Mainers who have second homes, so we have to make sure we get that math exactly right. But make no mistake, increasing it is a way to provide immediate relief. We are in a crisis, as my colleagues have noted, and therefore we need to pursue opportunities and pathways that deliver immediate relief. But Rob, your broader question is what can we do not just to provide tax relief, but also to lower the costs so that the tax bills aren't as high in the first place. One of the ways that we can do that is by making it easier for cities, towns, and municipalities to buy the services they need. They could do so, for example, off of a master contract at the state level. More broadly, the surest and longest term way to reduce property taxes is to grow the tax base. That entails bringing more people into Maine and, yes, even more businesses so that they can all shoulder the tax burden. That is how we'll bring the tax rate down.
We're in a crisis when it comes to property taxes and school funding. We saw it play out last summer when at least 20 communities rejected their school budgets. We see it right now in town meetings and communities where neighbors are pitted against neighbor, questioning whether they're going to increase property taxes or cut school funding yet again. And that's why I think we need to be bolder. As a state senator, I fought for increases in the homestead exemption, increases in revenue sharing and school funding, and we were successful. But it's time to stop tinkering around the edges. That's why I'm calling for this moratorium on increases in residential property taxes and a blue ribbon commission to study funding for schools, for our counties, for our cities and towns. At the state level in the budget, we need to invest far more in schools, and my Education New Deal for Maine would do that. And as head of the ACLU, I had a lot of experience with constitutional law. As Secretary of State, I successfully brought 2 constitutional amendments in partner with legislators, one around tribal printing of the tribal Wabanaki obligations in the Constitution, and one around streamlining election petitions, which is hardly non-controversial. So I'm confident we can do this because there's shared agreement among folks on all sides of the aisle that property taxes are too much and we're underfunding our schools.
Troy Jackson.
Yeah, well, this is something that, since I came back to the legislature in 2016, we did work on a lot. We did already double the homestead, did the property tax fairness credit, put a lot of money into that, and now because of COVID and valuations and things like that, it's like we didn't do anything. No one feels that. So I really don't think that doubling the homestead is anywhere near what we should be doing. I mean, even quadrupling it. Some of these homes, some of these areas, you know, people are paying $700,000-800,000 for a home that, you know, just a while back was maybe $250,000-300,000. So $100,000 off that's not going to move the dial for people like that. I do think that we need to, you know, target what revenue we can put into property tax relief and give a direct check back to homeowners, because that way they'll actually receive the money. They'll be able to help pay down their property tax bill. And that I think is actually going to help people with property taxes and you know, hopefully with the education funding too. But homestead I don't think is anywhere near enough now to make a difference in the way some of these people are really feeling the sting.
One thing that's worth noting, and Hannah Pingree alluded to it, is that the idea of raising property taxes on out-of-state folks who have a home, a second home in Maine, that is not allowed under the Maine Constitution. So as of now, that's not a solution. Does everyone agree with that?
Yes.
You can in Maine.
It's also not allowed under the U.S. Constitution, arguably, under the Privileges and Immunities Clause. So even if we were to go through the labor-intensive and long process of introducing and amending the Maine state constitution, then we'd still have to be tied up in years, with years and years of federal court litigation, assessing whether this is legal under the U.S. Constitution.
All right, I want to give
we have
Senator
a crisis
a
now,
chance to weigh in
and
on
so
this
we need
briefly, please, briefly.
That's simply not correct. You look at other states that are doing this. New York just proposed it, South Carolina. And again, as someone who headed the ACLU of Maine, we brought constitutional litigation that people said was impossible, and we won. And as Secretary of State, I helped work with the legislature to amend our Constitution. So certainly, I say we try it. Worst case scenario, an out-of-stater sues us. Maybe the law court, which does take constitutional cases very quickly. I've been part of many of them. Maybe they find it to be constitutional. Maybe they don't. And if they don't, we suddenly have the political will for a very quick constitutional amendment. I think we have to try. We need the courage and boldness to try.
All right, Hannah Pingree, final word on this topic.
Yeah, I do think that we may need to amend Maine's constitution and change how we assess property taxes, give towns more tools. We just saw the state of New York put a new tax in place on second homes over $5 million. That's a lot of money. I think in the state of Maine, you could pick a threshold like $2 million. So tax second homes worth more than $2 million. People need relief. We know that there are a lot of fancy homes in Maine in which people don't live in year-round, and Mainers need relief. I think this is the right way to go.
You've talked about taxing tourists or raising more revenue from tourists. Does that mean you would include or consider raising the meals tax, which is now 8%, or the lodging tax, which is now 9%? Hannah, I think it's still your ball.
Yeah, I do think that Maine people need a break, and we have millions of people who come to our state every summer who can afford to pay more. We just sat down with a number of communities in southern Maine who asked us desperately for some kind of local option so that they could both invest in infrastructure and provide property tax relief. So I think everything needs to be on the table, and I think a local option makes sense. But you can't leave rural communities behind. And I think the only kind of local option that I would support is something that is shared with rural communities across the state who are struggling with many of the same challenges. Again, I think we need to start thinking regionally. I think a regional local option tax that, again, is shared with service centers and their surrounding rural communities could both deliver property tax relief, but also allow us to invest in housing, allow us to invest in the things that communities so desperately need.
Rob Shaw, do you agree with that? Meals, lodging, and maybe local sales tax where applicable?
Agree in part, disagree in part. So one of my other principles when it comes to taxing is those who want to have the privilege of coming to Maine as tourists should shoulder and pay their fair share. So toward that end, I'm absolutely in favor of a local option for lodging, much less in favor of a local option for meals as well as sales taxes. Both of those also place additional burden on Maine people who are going out to eat or just buying things. So yes, as to the lodging, much more skeptical as to the meals and general sales tax.
Shanna Bellows?
So we had this opportunity to meet with Greater Portland Council of Governments, and they proposed this idea of a local option sales tax with benefits going to the region of service centers. I think that's a great idea. I think we need to give communities more ability to tax tourists and folks coming from out of state to bring in revenue for investments in our municipalities at the local level. And so I would absolutely support that. I also think we need to, however, look at the other side of things. We need to grow businesses in our state. So I think it'll be really important to partner with workers and the Chamber of Commerce to really explore all of the options. I think we can be pro-worker and pro-business and move our state forward.
Troy Jackson?
Well, I mean, definitely, when you go to other states, their meals and lodging is higher. It doesn't seem to affect their tourism. I still think people are going to come here. I mean, we could do something even for the summer months that meals and lodging went up whenever, you know, everything would be on the table in that regard. You know, but I've proposed to raise revenue sharing to communities. I mean, it's been at 5%. We just got back to 5%, and it's been like that since the 70s. While EMS services, you know, all those things are challenged, firefighters and things like that. I mean, communities need more services, and they can't really rely on property taxes anymore. And so these things all have to be on the table to try and do that. And I do think, to the previous question, I do think that would be hard to do. I think it would be unfortunate to put people to believe that they could do that. I think that we can get money from people that are coming out of state and give it to people with homestead, but I don't know that we can go against the Constitution to actually tax people from away homes more. There's other ways to go around that to hit them and get the revenues that we should have, but that's one that I think would actually make a lot of people very excited, and then we wouldn't be able to do it, and nothing would happen.
Angus King III?
Thanks. We live in a wonderful place, and people from all around the world spend 50 weeks a year thinking about the 2 weeks that they're going to get to come to Maine. They do not, in that calculation, think about, is the lodging tax, you know, X or X plus 1. So I think there is opportunity for a lodging tax. I agree with Nirav. Sales and meals taxes are regressive. They are not a good tax, and they're not something that we should be following. Also, sometimes local option taxes get used somewhat indiscriminately and just end up raising your budget and spending more money as opposed to going to specific things. Other states have had success by capping them, by making them quite specific in how you use them, and making sure that they're time-bound so that voters have a chance to take another look. There's some interesting thinking about seasonality of taxes so that it might be, have more impact on tourists when they come and less impact on the people when they live here. And then, of course, the last thing we need to do is continue to grow our economy. We have to make sure that we can raise all boats and ultimately improve the results for all of us. And that's the way we're going to do it.
Let me just ask a question that you can give a yes or no answer to. And Nirav Shah, I'll start with you. Would you consider raising the meals and lodging taxes from Memorial Day to, when the leaves fall?
Yes.
Would you consider raising the meals and lodging tax during peak tourist season from Memorial Day to the fall? If that could be done, would you support it?
So I think it's worth exploring. I think every option should be on the table, but I don't know that I need more information on how other states do that.
Okay, Troy Jackson?
I think I was the one to give you that idea, was I not?
You are correct, sir.
I mean, again, though, I mean, the same thing. I mean, we have to look at it and see what it raises and how it would affect Mainers, true Mainers. But if you can give them immediate property tax relief and they're not getting hit as hard, then I think it's worth exploring. But I also think
okay,
that
right.
unless we're going to raise revenue sharing, because that money is going to go back to the state, and that should be coming back in revenue sharing.
Understood. Angus King.
I think it's an interesting idea as long as taxes go down in the off-season so that Mainers are held whole.
Okay. Hannah Pingree, final word on this.
Yeah, I agree with Troy. I think it is a good idea. I live in a community where I'm served by a state ferry. They raise the rates from May to October, and they go down in the winter, so year-round people get a break. I think we can apply the same principle to a sales tax or a lodging tax here in the state of Maine.
All right, we are going to take a quick break here with our 5 candidates. When we return, we're going to talk housing, healthcare, and more. Stay with us as our News Center Maine Voice of the Voter debate continues. Welcome back to our News Center Maine Voice of the Voter debate. We're talking to the 5 candidates who are running in the Democratic primary. Voting has already begun in Maine. The primary is on June 9th. We're getting a chance to hear all their views, and we continue now with our questions.
We're going to focus a little bit more on affordability, everybody's hot topic, housing, healthcare, childcare, things like that. Let's start with housing. Whether somebody owns or rents, we know that in Maine the cost has never been higher. In part, this is the rule of supply and demand. we have a housing shortage, an estimated 80,000 units, according to a Mills administration report. Hannah Pingree, I think that was actually your report. But I think whose turn is it? Nirav Shah? I think it's this next question. We'll start with you. And the question that we really want to focus on is, what would you do as governor to accelerate our housing supply?
Great. Well, as you note, Phil, we have a crisis. And what we don't need is more of the same. We need a rescue mission. And for me, most of the action there is on increasing the supply of housing. There are two concrete strategies that the next governor can implement to make sure we actually increase our housing supply. Number one is creating a housing infrastructure fund. There are a lot of places across Maine where they'd like to see more housing being built in their towns, but the necessary infrastructure, water, sewage, drainage, doesn't yet exist. What Augusta can do is create a fund that allows those municipalities to create that infrastructure so housing can get built. The other thing that Augusta can do is help increase capacity at the local level. Growth requires local capacity, someone to approve the plans, someone to issue the permits. And right now, a lot of that local capacity has been hollowed out. One of the things Augusta can do is help supplement that for towns so that towns can actually move the building process through. Both of these things, when taken together, are a place to start, not the place to finish, but we've got a lot more work to do, and that's what I'll do as governor.
Secretary Bellows?
So Maine is a great place to vacation, but people can't afford to live here. And as I've traveled the state, I've heard story after story. Adult children living with their parents, an architect living with his parents, working on quote unquote affordable housing, but not able to afford any of those units. So first, we do need to build more housing, but it needs to be community-based solutions. I've talked to local nonprofits, land trusts, who are investing in housing that is debilitated, and they're restoring those houses and putting them back into the market with affordability liens, but can't get enough support from the state. So I think we should be investing in those nonprofits, in senior housing at the community level for working class seniors and middle class seniors, in housing for young people. I've proposed a housing corps to put young people in Maine to work as carpenters, electricians, and plumbers. They can rehabilitate old housing stock, but also build new housing across the state and build skills in the trades, because we certainly have a shortage in the trades. And that's just a little bit of my housing plan. You can read more at my Economic New Deal on bellowsformaine.com.
Troy Jackson?
Well, this has been an issue that's been coming along for quite a while now, and something I've been concerned about. That's why we created the Joint Select Committee on Housing that the legislature actually made full-time this past session. But I think besides building housing, I think the biggest thing, the quickest thing we can do is protect the housing stock we have right now. I mean, I've met with groups all over the place. Last one was in Lewiston, that people in the mobile home park that are, literally crying because they own their home and they're getting priced out of the lot rent and things like that. And many of them actually have to move out of their home because they can't move it. I mean, we can do something about private equity coming in, buying up trailer parks, pushing people out, and that's a big part of our housing crisis right there. On top of that, I think getting back to manufactured housing, we have a short construction season in this, but we can be doing manufactured housing all year. Getting rid of the red tape on stick built, 3D printed homes. I think even tax incentives for middle income renters is something that we can also do. We do it for wealthy people. We can do it for middle income people also.
We've got to do something differently. We've got to be much bolder. We've got to be much more innovative than we have been. We have a huge supply question, but it's not about reports. It's about the people. It's about families who can't move for love or money. It's about businesses who can't attract people. BIW brought hundreds of people from out of state to come here who are high skilled, ready to work, gave them a relocation allowance, and every single one of them moved back out because they couldn't find a place to live. That's a huge tax, that's a huge burden on our state, on our employers, on the families that call Maine home. My grandfather worked for Maine State Housing for many years. His name was Charlie Hazard, so I named my housing plan the Charlie Plan. And in that plan, it talks about urgency and accountability at the state level. We just had a solution that was going to help build more manufactured housing in Maine. It made its way through the legislature and died on the 1 yard line because no one was paying attention. We've got to be more focused. We've got to support innovation in Maine on design, on finance, on materials. There's a lot of work we can do. I've built thousands of units of housing for people. I know how to do it, and I'm really excited to get to work.
And Hannah Pingree.
I think housing is fundamental to Maine's future. I launched my campaign at a new housing facility because I think there is nothing more important than figuring out how do we keep young people in our state? How do we attract the workforce we need? And it always comes back to housing. I live in a community where 20 years ago, young people couldn't afford to buy a house. Our boatyard, our school, they couldn't find workers. So I dug in my own community and figured out how do we build housing for the people who live here year round. And then I did it as Speaker of the House. I figured out how do we start investing real money in housing production. I've spent the last 7 years working in the Mills administration figuring out how do we continue to accelerate that progress. A rural rental program, home ownership, figuring out how do we help residents buy their mobile home parks. And what I've learned is we do need to accelerate our progress, and that's why I put out a housing plan. You can check out the details at Hannah for Governor, but I propose investing $100 million a year, every year, in housing production. We do need, I completely agree with Troy, we need to stop private equity, especially from buying up mobile home parks, but also buying up apartments, the places in Maine that are already affordable. We need to partner with communities to get permitting done faster. We need a 90-day shot clock at the state level. We also need to partner with communities to stem the tide of rising homelessness. I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but the huge opportunity we also have in Maine is innovation. We have
All right, we're going to have to jump in there because you're over your time.
I could go on and on.
I don't doubt it. I do want to ask, though, about a $100 million program for housing. It costs $500,000 to build a home in Cumberland County, at least. So that's a drop in the bucket in a state that needs 80,000 new housing units. Are you really going to make any kind of an impact by putting $100 million of state money toward it? And if you could give me a concise answer, please.
Yes, sure. We will make progress with $100 million a year. We'll divide it up between rural rentals, affordable home ownership, partnering with communities to invest in the infrastructure that they need to continue to expand housing production. I know that the state is not going to fund every housing unit. We need to approximately double the pace of housing production to meet the demand, but the state needs to be a partner, especially for those units that are hardest to build.
All right, I'm going to jump in because I don't want to get too into the weeds on this, and I'm going to not let the others dig in on that question. We're going to move on to healthcare, another key component of the affordability challenges that Mainers are facing. It's an enormously complex subject. We'd all agree on that. So let me just ask you, given that so much of the healthcare financial problems are driven by what happens at the national level, what happens with federal policy, what can be done in Maine realistically by the next governor to try to bring down healthcare costs? Give me specifics on what realistically the next governor can do to address healthcare. Shanna Bellows.
So whether it was living in a dirt basement or kerosene lamps or genetic luck of the draw, I have really bad asthma, and emergency rooms in Ellsworth and Blue Hill have saved my life more than once. I believe no one should be sick because they are poor or poor because they are sick. We need universal health care for all, and as governor, I will work toward that goal. But in the short term, my very first budget will include dramatic investments in our hospitals, our birthing centers, family planning, and primary care practices, because we have to keep their doors open, especially in face of the cuts coming from the Trump administration and Congress. We need to fight back against Trump with everything that we have. That means litigation to get what we are owed. But we also have to take the state budget and invest in healthcare, particularly in rural areas. We also need to recruit workforce. Now, my mom at age 49 went back to school through the University of Maine system and became a nurse, serving as a home healthcare nurse during the pandemic. We need to give more credentials to folks here in our state and also recruit doctors and medical professionals from outside of the state to come and practice in Maine.
Here's a quick follow-up. Give me just a ballpark number. How much would universal health care cost in Maine?
Well, the Maine Center for Economic Policy has done a lot of calculations on this, and it is in the hundreds of millions, but there are some creative ways to utilize federal funding through Medicaid and Medicare. Maine All Care has some great plans on this area.
So the closest you can say is hundreds of millions of dollars with more to be picked up by
So I think what's
feds.
important is having
And
a plan and
we all
working
pay taxes
with
to the federal
stakeholders.
government.
So Maine All Care and Maine Center for Economic Policy has done some great work on this. I think stakeholders need to come together. As governor, I would convene a task force on universal health care and have them chart out an actual implementable plan.
Okay, Troy Jackson, same question. How would you address health care in a realistic way?
Well, so I believe Medicare for all, and as someone that I'm on my fifth pacemaker, getting that from the government, getting health insurance from the government, I know exactly what it means to everyday people that don't have it, don't struggle with, or struggle with it. And quite honestly, being in the legislature debating these issues is an embarrassment to me to have government-sponsored health care while other people struggle for it. You ask how much is it going to cost? We're already spending what it costs. I mean, that's for sure. So, I mean, we got study after study in the library about universal single payer. Every one of them says that we can do this because we're already spending the money that we do on healthcare already. So, you know, that to me is the biggest thing. And what would I do? I'd do what I've been doing all along. I'd go after Big Pharma. I passed 5 bills, they got vetoed. Colorado's doing one right now. We're 3 years behind. I mean, your initial question is because this is something the federal government does. Exactly, and they don't do anything. That's why we have to do it as a state, because this is the only chance that people in Maine have got, is if the state of Maine actually does the work, because DC's broke and is never going to fix it.
Angus King III.
Yeah, I agree with you that a lot of these challenges are at the federal level, and different states, some individual states have tried to do some of these things. It's been very costly and complex, and ultimately they've had to pull back. But what can a governor do? There's a lot that a governor can do. I'd mostly be focused, for starters, on outcomes and on costs. Regardless of who pays, our costs for our healthcare system are way too expensive. There's no reason my son's asthma medicine costs 4 times what it costs a couple hundred miles north in Canada. There's no reason that my family would have gotten a $100 bill for 3 days in the hospital for one of my family members. That is outrageous. We have a huge cost problem, and we have an outcomes problem. Our outcomes are terrible. And so I think one of the things we can think about is, I'd quote Ben Franklin, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We don't do enough prevention. We don't do enough preventative care, enough early screening, enough primary care. That's where I would be focused in how do we raise public health. You can't legislate jumping jacks and eating your fiber, but we've got to figure out a way to make people healthier so they don't have to access specialists, they don't have to access the ER, and they don't have to have exposure to all of the really outrageous costs that our healthcare system incurs today.
Hannah Pingree.
We do live in the richest country in the world and some of the poorest health outcomes. I strongly support universal health care, but we absolutely need a partner at the federal level, since so much of our spending comes from Medicaid and Medicare. I'm one of those families on the Affordable Care Act. My family of 4, my husband and 2 kids, we paid $700 a month last year. This year we're paying over $2,000 a month. We know that many people in the state of Maine have lost their health insurance coverage. That's why my health care plan, I propose a public insurance option. Not to take over the rest of the market, but for individuals and small businesses who can't afford insurance, the state would help to negotiate a better deal for you. I think it's absolutely essential that we keep people covered. I also think we need to significantly invest in primary care. Everybody needs somebody who cares about their health. Again, whether it's a doctor, a nurse practitioner, or a community health worker. That also goes to reproductive health care and maternity care. People need to be cared for in their communities, and especially in our rural areas, people are increasingly concerned that they're not going to have access to coverage. This is going to be a job on day 1 for the next governor.
Nirav Shah.
You know, Rob, you know what gets my goat is that as Democrats, we used to be bold on health care. We were the party of Medicare, even the Affordable Care Act. We used to take big swings. So here's a big swing that the next governor can take to really improve our health care. Hospitals, particularly in rural Maine, are basically like public utilities. They're really no different from the fire department or the police department. But the way we pay hospitals is completely bonkers. We basically pay them like restaurants. You show up, you order a sandwich or a colonoscopy, you pay your money, and if the hospital does well, then everyone's great. But imagine if we paid the fire department that way. Right? Imagine if the way that we finance the fire department was, hey, we'll pay you based on how many times you get in the truck or how many times you use that hose. We would all say that's crazy. We should fund them so that they are there and ready when we need them. That's how we should approach hospitals. This is what's called global budgeting. Is it easy? No. But is it the direction we should be going in Maine, particularly for rural hospitals? Absolutely. Is it going to be easy? Not even close. But I sure as hell am going to get caught trying.
I don't know, this whole Democrats been taking swings at Big Pharma, and that's what we got to do. I mean, the greed of that industry is making healthcare impossible to have, and I just disagree with people that think that all these things, people don't have healthcare. I don't know how you're going to give them a public option or anything like that when they just don't have healthcare at all. They can't afford it. We have to bring down the cost, and we go after the people that put the money in their pockets time after time after time.
Troy, let me continue with you since it's your turn. We're going to switch to child care, which is also a huge cost for many families. For some, it causes one parent to quit a job because they realize so much of the income is just going to childcare or daycare. It's like a second mortgage, some people say. So, two parts. The state just increased the amount it will subsidize childcare providers with a monthly wage stipend ranging from $240 to $540, again, per month per worker. That's to help the provider side. Would you continue that? It just passed in the supplemental budget. And secondly, as governor, what can you do for the parents who are paying the bills of child care? Troy, you've talked about a 7% cap, in other words, 7% of family income. How would that work? And then we'll go down the line.
Well, I mean, we work together with all kinds of people in the child care industry because child care industries were closing. People couldn't find spots. I mean, I worked with the chamber about trying to do this so that more people could get in the workforce. And I think this is something that is, you know, a really big deal for the state of Maine. We talk about growing our economy. I think if we actually provide child care in the state, we will grow our economy by bringing in even more people from out of state. This is something that has to happen, and I've been very happy to be working with people on it. I think that what I've proposed is that anyone under $150,000 a year, a family of 4, would get free child care. Anyone over that would pay no more than 7%. That is something that I feel we can do, and I think it frees up so many people to go in the workforce, which obviously grows our economy, and I think it's a business attraction tool to bring people here. Hey, young family, we have free child care here. Come to Maine, come to work for us. So I'm very excited about this, and I hope to hell that we're going to get it done.
When you say free, you mean the state would pay for it?
Yeah.
Okay. Angus King III?
Yeah, I'm trying to be pretty careful and not make a promise like that. That's a lot of money, and right now, as we've all talked about, the future budget is going to be short, not long, and I think I'm trying to be as careful as I can be, not making financial promises during this campaign, because I think we're all going to have to tighten our belts in the future, given the cuts that are coming from the feds. On childcare, though, it is absolutely holding us back. We need more young people living in Maine, staying in Maine, and childcare is a huge burden, and it's a giant impediment to people being able to stay here and be able to afford here. I think we've got to do more things like support what BIW is doing. BIW realized this is a huge challenge for our employees, so we're going to build a childcare in Bath, and we're going to find a way to help support our employees, and that'll be a benefit that they'll do. We should be doing that. We should be helping businesses do more of that. We should be lowering the regulatory burden on some childcare centers because, at least what I'm told, it makes it harder and more expensive. And then finally, we've got to improve our overall business environment. I talked to a childcare company who was out of state. I said, you should come to Maine. They're all over the country. And they said, we're not coming because your business environment is way too difficult. And so we are not getting a good business here, but we're also not getting the childcare that we need, and we've got to improve there too.
Hannah Pingree?
Maine needs to be a great state for families. We're the oldest state in the country. We desperately need workforce, so childcare is essential, and I hear it from parents all over the state. I was a mom with 2 young kids living in a rural community, and we didn't have enough childcare so I could go to work. So what did I do? I actually got together with some of my neighbors, and we talked our community center into starting a childcare facility. I've done it the same at the state level, working for Governor Mills. We expanded rural childcare slots. We are on the way to universal pre-K, which is a huge help to families. But we need to do much more. I have partnered with Troy Jackson. He has been a real pioneer and leader in this, in the salary supplement so our workers can get paid a decent wage. These are some of the hardest working people in the state of Maine, and they don't get paid enough. But also the child care supplement program that helps middle and low-income families afford child care. The legislature did just put more money into this. We had a waiting list of over 1,000 families who couldn't afford child care, and they were waiting for this program. We need to ensure that there is no waiting list. I do think it is essential, though, that we allow families to get to work, and we need to make sure that it is affordable.
Nirav Shah?
Right now in Maine, it's almost like we're trying to build a 21st century workforce, but with a 19th century childcare model. It's almost kind of like out of a Dickens novel, where so many families are struggling and trying to figure out what to do. Now, to me, what we fundamentally need are businesses in Maine that have more skin in the childcare game. what I mean by that is that childcare is not only just a human and social need, it's also an economic need. And right now, it's putting a handbrake on our economy because one spouse, usually the woman, unfortunately, is staying out of the workforce. So we've got a lot more to do if we want to unshackle this part of our economy. How can we do so? Well, there are promising models across the state that are already being put underway. For example, United Way has been working with businesses across Maine to get those businesses at the local level to make more investments in childcare in exchange for making sure those businesses have reserved seats at the childcare. That way everyone benefits. The business has more skin in the game, the community gets more childcare, and children actually have a place to go during the day.
And Shanna Bellows?
We need universal childcare and universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds, both to support families being able to have children and to support those children and their healthy development. When I started this campaign, I was up in Presque Isle, I met a young couple. They told me they had 2 kids, they wanted a third, but they couldn't afford it because of the cost of childcare and healthcare. Talking to childcare providers, one told me that parents call her to say when she has an available spot, and right now they're planning for 2027. So families who want to have babies can't, they have to wait. And I think this is hugely important for economic development in our state and also from a moral perspective. Our children, quite literally, are in fact our future. And so this is something that I will work on as governor. I think we can do it. I think it's smart investments in our future of our state.
Can anyone put a price tag on what universal child care is going to cost? Some of you have already come out for universal health care. Obviously, the spending is adding up. These are not small sums. These are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that you're talking about. Put a price tag on universal child care.
Child care advocates estimate $400 million. And what I will say is what Troy said earlier today. We're already spending some of these costs on health care and child care in other ways. They're being borne by the lowest income folks in our communities, and we're seeing it in the fact that young people are not staying in our state. They don't feel like they can afford to live here, and they're not having children. So the costs of not doing this far exceed the cost of doing it. And I'm the only person on this stage that has experience finding millions of dollars of savings in state government. And if I can do that, if I can cut red tape and streamline the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, I think I could do it for the rest of the state as well.
We already put $60 million into it, so it is around $400 million. So it'd be an additional 350. But look, I mean, these are people that are professionals that are having to leave the industry because they're not getting paid enough. I don't know how many business owners I've talked to that couldn't get paid. The state was behind on, and I had to advocate for the state to give them their money because they're right on the edge all the time. I don't need to go out of state to get child care facilities. What I got to do is help the ones that are here in the state, keep them going. And in places like Bath Iron Works, they take advantage of this program, the stipends and stuff like that. So even if they're doing it on site, they're still taking state resources. And that's why it's important for the state to step up and invest in this, because it is a priority, and we're losing so many people because they don't have child care.
I want to move on very briefly on this topic. What it boils down to, again, talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in additional spending. So let me just put it a little differently. The Republicans are going to say that you are big spending Democrats and that you're going to take taxpayer money, you're going to put it into government programs that are not effective. That's how they're going to paint you. How would you respond?
My turn?
Your turn.
I have been very careful to not make promises about spending on this campaign. It is critical, I think, that the next governor does not have their hands tied on what we're going to do. I believe in all of these values about the importance of childcare, the importance of all these other pieces, but I agree, actually, that we cannot make promises that we can't deliver on, because fundamentally, I think that's why people are so cynical that government never gets anything done. I think it's incredibly important that we make promises that we can deliver on. I used to work for a guy who said, make and honor well thought out commitments. You have to make commitments, but you also have to make sure that they're well thought out and that you can deliver on them so that you can honor them in the long run. That's what drives me in this race.
I do think budgets are about choices and choices are about our values. I've worked on more than 20 state budgets. As a 26-year-old legislator, I served on the Appropriations Committee during a very difficult fiscal period where we had to balance the budget, and we passed a bipartisan budget in those days. I have done this work before, and I'm ready to do it again. But I do think we need to invest in those things that allow our state to be successful. For me, housing and healthcare are the two fundamental things. If we don't have enough housing for workers and young people to stay in our state, nothing else works. If we don't have a healthcare system that allows you to live in the rural parts of our state, whole parts of our state will be hollowed out. That's why those are my two priorities.
Rob, for me, when I think about big, difficult public policy issues like childcare, like housing, I try to think about the long-term North Star and then the short-term solutions. Long-term North Star, whether it's childcare, healthcare, yes, I'd like to move us toward a universal model. That said, right now, we don't have the funding available and we have a crisis on our hands, so we also simultaneously need to come up with solutions that can provide relief right now, and that's why I think partnering with the private sector and making sure they've got skin in the game will help provide immediate relief.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back with our, well, we gave you the follow-ups on the child care and the universal and the cost. All right, go ahead, quickly. Give Shannon Bellows, quickly.
So thank you. I'm passionate about budgets because I have a career in writing budgets and balancing budgets. And I think this is an incredibly important question. When I was a state senator, folks said that we couldn't afford free meals for all of our kids. My first term, I brought a bill because I'd been a free lunch kid. I knew what it was like. That didn't pass under LePage, but under Governor Mills, we did in fact get universal school meals, including breakfast after the bell, which I sponsored. So I do think as we approach the budget, we need to bring our moral values to that budget as well as our experience. And I have the lived experience of growing up poor, the state Senate experience of building bipartisan coalitions to get things done, and the executive experience as secretary.
Troy Jackson, final word on this subject.
Well, if I was going to worry about the Republicans calling me names, I guess I wouldn't be standing up here. But that's not the issue. The issue is that this is a priority, and I can guarantee you that if they needed $500 million for an income tax cut for wealthy people, they would find it. This is something that we have to do. This is something we can do, and we're already, again, losing that productivity in the workforce. So I actually think it's going to save us money in the end, and we can do this. Just like universal school meals, they said that couldn't be done. There's so many things. I mean, Roosevelt would have never gotten the New Deal off the ground if he'd listened to people like that.
All right, we're going to let that be the final word on that topic. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with the Democratic candidates for governor right after this. Time now to resume our questioning of the 5 candidates for governor in the Democratic race. We've got more issues to deal with, and Phil, take it away.
We're going to talk about education, and we know that under Governor Mills, the state increased, well, as required, its share of state education for K through 12 to 55%. That's the average statewide. And I guess the question is money enough? The state also finally just agreed to give public school teachers a 20% raise, which you've all expressed support for, from $40,000 to $50,000. I know some of you will say it should be even more. But I guess the question comes down to, if paying teachers more and spending more per pupil is the answer, how come Maine has fallen to 41st place for education since 1992, according to Kids Count? Maybe simply spending more money isn't working. What will work better? And I think we're up to Shannon Bellows going first.
I started kindergarten at Hancock Grammar School with a lisp, but I had free school-based speech therapy and great public school teachers. There's no question in my mind that but for Hancock Grammar School and Ellsworth High School, I would not be standing here today as Maine's first female Secretary of State and candidate for governor. So I intend to be Maine's next education governor, and I'm proud to have been endorsed, ranked first by the Maine Education Association, the Maine teachers. And that's because my Education New Deal for Maine includes many elements. Now, one, we do need to pay our teachers more. $50,000 isn't enough. I've talked to teachers all across the state who are using the food pantry to get by, and that is not right, and it's creating a workforce shortage. We need to recruit new teachers into the profession. At the state level, we have used local control as an excuse to abdicate our responsibility, both for funding and for standards. I run the state's driver education program. We have approved curriculum for the driver education schools that the schools can use. We need accountability. We need to help kids read and do math better. We need to focus on those fundamentals as well as the industrial arts and the trades. I will be Maine's next education governor. This is going to be one of my top priorities.
Troy Jackson.
Yeah, the way that you brought that up, again, Governor Mills did this, but I'd like to say the legislature did this since the legislature has control of the budget. But also going back to 91, I mean, we just got to 55%. So I don't really know how you can make the argument that we put enough money in education and our education system's been going downhill since 91. We haven't. I mean, we just haven't put enough money into that. And the whole idea of teachers getting 50,000, it's over the next 3 years. I mean, they've been held back forever. I mean, we've been promised 50,000 way before this, and it hasn't happened. So we're not getting teachers into the field. But look, something that I think about a lot is, when I was growing up, my mother was a teacher. A lot of times she'd be able to help me at school, at my schoolwork and things like that. Now you have it so that parents are working multiple jobs, 2, 3 jobs, different schedules and things like that. Kids are at home. I mean, there's a lot going on in the education why we might have lower scores. But I definitely think that putting more money in education will help raise them up. I think making people in this state have better opportunities so that they can spend time with their kids and help their kids at home is going to be another way that we're going to raise their education scores.
Angus King III.
And childcare.
My brothers would never have been able to make fun of me as a mathlete if it weren't for John Meringue. And I am deeply in his debt, but that was 30 years ago, when our schools were literally among the best in the country, and now they are among the worst. We cannot keep doing what we're doing. So I put out a how to get back to being the best plan. It starts with what are we going to do for our kids. Right now, 3 out of 4 of our kids in our state are not reading proficiently. They can't read by the end of 3rd grade. That's inexcusable, because if you can't read, not everything else becomes harder. Your economic future, your academic future. So number 1, we've got to focus on reading. Number 2, we've got to focus on training so that kids are getting exposure to the jobs of today and tomorrow earlier on in their career, even as far back as middle school. We've got to help teachers, number 1, by taking cell phones and social media out of classrooms so kids are paying attention. They're signing out library books and playing hacky sack instead. And we've got to help them on their career paths as well. And then finally, we've got to have more accountability and transparency so that we know how our schools are doing and can deploy resources and attention and community involvement to help the schools that are struggling. I know we can do it. It's got to be all hands on deck. It's the thing that's most important to me right now.
Hacky sack. I like that. Hannah Pingree.
I am the mom of 2 teenage kids. I am very, very grateful every day for their teachers and great schools. I'm a product of public education. I spent 9 years on a school board. It was literally the hardest job I ever had in politics, and I served also as Speaker of the House, because people care so deeply about our kids, and we do need to do better. We absolutely need adequate funding. We need to ensure 55%. We need to keep working to make sure the school funding formula is fair. We do need to pay teachers an adequate wage. We need a cost of living increase for those teachers, not just get stuck at $50,000. But we need to engage kids. We know that we need to do better in reading and math. There is no surprise about that. And we need to start investing in teacher training and schools so every school has support to ensure that we know how to get every kid in the 3rd grade and the 8th grade to where they need to be. And right now, that's not happening all across the state of Maine. But the other thing is engagement. I travel around the state of Maine, and people are really worried about our middle school kids, our high school kids who are not paying attention. We need to take cell phones out of classrooms, but we need to do more. We need to start investing in career and technical education at the middle school level so we don't lose any kid as they start to be a little distracted. We win every kid. We only graduate 12,000 kids a year in the state of Maine. We need everybody ready by the time they graduate from high school.
And Nirav Shah.
I'm really proud to have also been among one of the 3 candidates here on the stage this evening that was endorsed by the Maine Education Association. And as the product of public schools myself, I know how vital it is to shore up our school system here in Maine. So Phil, you asked if funding is necessary. Of course it's necessary, particularly for our teachers. Right now we're facing a workforce shortage, and we are asking teachers to do everything. They not only just have to teach, they have to be guidance counselors, mental health counselors, food bank operators, and security guards. So 50,000 is the absolute minimum, and if anything, we should be talking about the next increase. But Phil, funding is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Other states have turned around their education systems without meaningful or sizable increases in their budgets. Some of it was through different standards. Some of it was through two things I want to focus on. Number 1 is providing more behavioral health supports. Right now in Maine, about 1 in 5 kids in our schools contemplated self-harm in the recent months and weeks. A child in crisis can't learn. Here's the other thing we've got to do a lot better on. 1 in 5 kids in Maine has gone hungry at one point in the last couple of weeks. A child who is hungry has no shot about learning. That's why we need to not just make sure our schools are better, but all of the services and supports that those kids need are wrapped around them.
A lot of the problems that we've talked about tonight would be reduced if Maine had more jobs that pay really well. So let me see what you would each be like as a salesperson for the state of Maine, as governor. Here's the scenario. You're the governor in the Blaine House. A business person comes to you and says, I'm thinking about expanding my business. I could do it in New Hampshire, where there is no sales tax and no income tax, or I can do it in Maine. So in other words, could do it in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, or could do it in Kittery, Maine. What is the pitch that you would make to that business person to lure the business to Maine? Troy Jackson.
Well, I've done that a lot already. I mean, I can't see anyone in the audience, but I was the one that actually did the expansion for IDEX, made them a Maine company. I brought McCrumb's potato processing to Aroostook County. I've worked with Bath Iron Works. I've worked with Twin Rivers. I mean, I'm okay doing tax incentives to bring a business here if we write the jobs that we want into the plan, and we have clawbacks if they don't do that. And that I think is how we get people, incentivize people to come to Maine. Plus, we tell them, hey, we have free childcare here. So all of your employees are going to have childcare. They won't have to worry about that. I know that people in Caribou that wanted to buy a hotel there, the first thing they did before they bought the hotel was went to Jordan Rosenall and found out if they had spots for their children. That's another reason why this is so big for business traction. But we can bring businesses here by giving them a great pitch, giving them tax incentives, if they provide the jobs that we want that are going to be good paying jobs with health care and benefits like that.
Just to repeat, they've already got pretty good tax incentives in New Hampshire, where there's no sales tax, no income tax. Angus King, what would be your pitch?
Well, first I'd tell them they've got a hell of a good governor and a partner here in Maine. Someone who has spent his life creating businesses, creating jobs, and knows how difficult it can be in some states and how important it is that the state is a partner to the private sector so that we can help bring businesses here, we can help people create good jobs. Someone who knows how to do it is going to be a much more attractive partner, I think. Secondly, we talk about Maine can be a place where natural capital meets innovation. We have incredible resources here in fiber, in the ocean, in our workforce, and we've got great innovation centers in the Rue Institute, in the university's Composite Center. We've got all kinds of really great things that are on the horizon, and if I'm governor, we're also going to have a workforce that delivers the skills that everybody needs, that every business needs, because I'll have gotten everybody together, universities, colleges, businesses, to make sure that our workers are trained on the skills that people need. If we can combine capital with natural resources, with a governor who's been there and done that and created businesses, I think we can bring a lot more business here to Maine and make them successful.
We know we live in the greatest state in the country, and we have some of the hardest working people. And so the next governor does need to be very focused on economic opportunity, especially for our rural areas. I think we have a lot to offer as a state, but we need to invest more in our small businesses, our workers, and innovation. And that's what I will do as governor. I've run a family small business. I know how hard it is. We need to make it much easier to navigate as a small business, state systems, and get approvals more quickly. We need to keep investing in innovation. I agree with Angus. We have tremendous opportunities in our forest products sector, in our farming sector, in our marine sector. We know that's where so many jobs of the past have come from, and there's so many jobs in the future, especially as we invest in innovation. We also need to invest in our workers. The number one thing I hear about from the State Chamber of Commerce as well as the AFL-CIO is we need more opportunity for our workers. They don't have enough housing. They don't have enough childcare. Those are the things that are holding them back. So how do we invest in the workers of the future? We know that job training programs, free community college, making sure our kids are ready for the workforce, all of those things need to be part of the solution.
Nirav Shah, give us the pitch that you would give to a prospective business.
I would look them in the eye and say that Maine has the one thing New Hampshire will never have, and that is the people of Maine. First and foremost, we have among the most educated workforces in the country, and now with the addition of free community college, a workforce pipeline that will only be expanding. We have one of the highest percentages of any state with the number of college graduates. We have folks, even our older Mainers, for example, half of whom want to get back into the workforce. So we have got one of the things that businesses across the country are looking for, and that is a workforce. But we've got a lot more than that. We also have innovation that's happening around every corner, whether it's with green energy, whether it's with advanced forest products, whether it's with life sciences, veterinary health. We have got the innovation that's happening here. We also have access to natural resources, whether it's deep water ports, access to water, access to clean air. We have it all here. The last thing that we have that I would put New Hampshire up against any day is we have got quality of life. We have got what New Hampshire cannot offer, which is a culture that values quality of life above all else. By my lights, there's no reason to go anywhere else.
Shannon Bellows.
I'll say Maine is the way life should be. We are a welcoming state for immigrants, for new Mainers, for the LGBTQ plus community, for everyone. And we have the most beautiful and phenomenal natural resources in the whole country, our forest products economy, marine resources. And we have a culture of innovation. Traveling around the state, talking to groups like Startup Maine and Focus Maine, there's a lot of really exciting entrepreneurship happening here in our state. When I was a state senator, I co-chaired the broadband caucus with a Republican from Piscataquis County. And so I'll pledge to them that as governor, I'm going to invest in infrastructure that makes Maine competitive for businesses, and that will be an accessible government. I'll propose a one-stop shop for businesses so they don't have to navigate interminable bureaucracy. There'll be a single portal for businesses to provide their paperwork, and then on the back end, we can make sure that it goes to where it needs to go. And I'll just share this. When I was talking to the founders of Stonewall, they said when they were starting out their business, they started out in farmers markets, and they were thinking about leaving Maine. But the governor's office reached out to them and helped them find a place to build their business.
All right,
that's the type of customer service.
Be the last word. We're going to move on to one more topic.
In addition to needing more jobs, we need higher paying jobs. So I wonder, and if you could all answer this in 30 seconds or less, would you support raising the statewide minimum wage, which is currently $15.10 an hour? It is indexed to inflation, but what about $17 an hour, as it is currently in Portland, going up to $19 an hour by 2028? Let's start with you, Angus King III.
Yeah, I think the minimum wage is important, but I think I would really want to focus on economic growth. How do we improve more, better, higher paying jobs here in Maine? The innovation jobs we just talked about, like the ones at Jack's, are great, high paying jobs. So more R&D, attracting that to Maine is really important. The same with what we're doing at the Rue Institute. How are we increasing worker productivity with innovations? How are we supporting more upskilling and more training so that people can get bigger jobs? I was just at Elmet Technologies the other day. They're building incredibly technical, impressive things for both the government and for lots of different businesses. They are short on skilled workers. It is a huge challenge, and so we have a huge opportunity to grow that skilled workforce base, to raise people's wages, to make them be able to earn a better wage so that they can afford these costs that keep rising for all of us.
Hannah Pingree. Minimum wage.
I think the minimum wage being indexed makes a whole lot of sense. Our minimum wage is now well over double the federal minimum wage. That is good for Maine workers, and it needs to keep going up, and it will keep going up. But I completely agree. We need to continue to build better paying jobs for Maine people. A lot of young people who can't afford to stay in a city like Portland, it's not just the cost of housing, it's there are not enough good paying jobs to keep young people here. I'm so excited by what the university is doing, what the community college is doing, about the Rue Institute. We need to continue to invest in how we grow the economy and good paying jobs. And that does come from those kind of employers who are able to pay more. And that's why so much of this is about economic opportunity. I put out a plan at my website, Hannah for Governor. Check out my ideas, especially for rural Maine.
Nirav Shah, minimum wage, raise it.
I do support raising the minimum wage, but I don't want to let that be the end of the conversation. The best way to raise wages in the long term for every single worker in the economy, well above the minimum wage, is by growing the economy, getting more competition among employers for the best employees, and making sure we've got an environment where talent gets higher wages. That's the best way to get the wages up.
Thank you for doing that in 20 seconds. Shannon Bellows.
I've been fighting for economic justice and social justice, and I was part of the campaign to raise the minimum wage here in Maine and to index it to inflation, which it currently is. And when I was in the state Senate, under LePage, I fought back and stopped changes to the minimum wage. So as governor, I'll veto any changes, and I'll always support workers and businesses. We can be pro-worker and pro-business.
And Troy Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of anything that raises wages for people. And so this would definitely be on the table also. But I mean, I think it's a lot more than that. I mean, you know, we are in a low wage state. You know, again, I don't know who's out in the audience, but across the state, People are not getting paid the same amount as they are in New Hampshire, as in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has income tax. I mean, as a member of 5 unions, I can go to Massachusetts and get like $25, $30 an hour more to run a piece of equipment than I can here in Maine. So there's a lot that we can do. Project labor agreements is something that the governor has blocked time and time again. We lost the port in Searsport, a $450 million project, because they wouldn't put project labor agreements in. I believe in workers having a fair deal. I've worked with businesses, but I think workers have to always be part of the equation.
Okay, Rob, I think you've the last question of the night.
And I'm going to need answers that are about 30 seconds from each of you because we're running out of time. Electability. One of you will be the Democratic nominee for governor. You're going to need votes from independents and Republicans. What would you say to those voters in Maine to win their support in November? Hannah Pingree.
I've run for office 7 times. I have never lost. I was elected as Speaker of the House in 2008 unanimously by Republicans, Democrats, and Independents because they trusted me. They knew that I would show up and listen, and I would work across the aisle to deliver solutions. I think the job of the next governor is to listen to the people of Maine. And as I travel the state, it's not complicated. It's not political. People in rural Maine, they want their hospitals to stay open. They want quality jobs for their kids. They want good schools. I think you go out and you listen to the people of Maine and you talk about the issues that matter. That's how we win in November.
Nirav Shah.
What this election is about is finding and having a governor that will show up and have your back. My fellow Mainers, I have shown up and had your back before in some of the darkest times that our state has gone through. And that's what I'll do as governor. Whether you are a logger from Fort Kent, a lobsterman from Lubec, a shipbuilder in Bath, I will show up and have your back. That's the type of accessibility and accountability that Mainers have seen before, and that is what they will get with me as governor.
Shanna Bellows.
I'm one of the only Democrats in the state that's won a district that voted for Trump and voted for me. I'm from CD2, I live in CD2. And I've been leading the fight against Trump, against ICE. If you want a governor who will stand up to Trump, choose the one who already has. But I'll tell you this, I go on conservative talk radio all the time. And I was in Bucksport touring polling places recently. A guy comes barreling up to me. Are you Sheena Bellows? It's Shanna. I hear you on the radio all the time. You and Donald Trump are my favorite politicians. And what he said was, I don't always agree with you, but you always say what you mean. And I'll always be straight with the Maine voters. Troy Jackson.
Well, I was a Senate president over the last 8 years, for 6 of those years, and Republicans have voted for me unanimously too. That's something that I'm very proud of also. But the thing about it is I am up in Aroostook County, an area that used to be Democratic, now is rock red. I was the last Democrat elected there. And like I said, whenever I left, a district I've been winning by 5 points, we lost by 30. I've demonstrated already that I can win in rural Maine. I've been doing it all my life. And that exactly is why I'm the best candidate to win in November, because I have been winning in November consistently.
We've got a little more than a minute left. Yeah, sorry, Angus King. Sorry, didn't mean to deprive you of your answer. My apologies.
All right. This moment calls for different. It calls for a leader who has created innovative solutions. It calls for a leader who has harnessed the power of shared work and a clear vision. Someone who has put public and private sectors together, urban and rural views together, clean energy and climate know-how together, heck, even Democratic and Republican ideas together to make a difference in people's lives. That's what's going to win in November. That's what's going to build a better Maine. And with your vote, we can build it together. Thanks, everybody.
And thank you, all 5 candidates. We appreciate you being here with us this evening. That brings us to the end of our debate. Our thanks as well to the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, our partner in this debate. We've appreciated their support and their input.
And if you missed our debate with the Republican candidates for governor that aired last night, you can watch it on our website, newscentermaine.com, or our streaming app. We'll have an analysis show on this debate coming up next.
That'll be on in just a moment. Thanks for watching. Have a good night. Don't forget, the primary is coming up on June 9th. The general election, of course, the first week in November.
And early voting is underway. Good luck, everybody.
Good night.